When I saw that client walk into the room, I was instantly overwhelmed with desire. His presence was commanding, and I couldn't help but notice. My name is Beatrice, and today I'll share the story of my first betrayal. Until that point, I had never cheated on anyone, not even my husband of 14 years. I always viewed infidelity as the ultimate act of disloyalty, something I never thought I would do. I've always believed in the importance of fidelity and respect in a relationship. As a married woman, I had no complaints about my intimate life. My husband was attractive, and our emotional and physical connection had always been solid. We shared many happy moments and built a life together that appeared perfect on the surface. However, even in an apparently ideal marriage, routine and daily challenges can sometimes create emotional voids. I would say, without hesitation, that my husband had much more passion and energy than I did, but I felt he should be doing something beyond the usual routine. Men shouldn't be fooled. We women have a sense that alerts us to these things. With this in mind, I waited, hoping to discover something. After several months, the only things I found were suspicious messages and questionable websites he had been visiting on his phone. This made me angry, but I wasn't going to confront him without concrete proof. Then one day, one of my patients caught my attention. As a dentist, I work behind closed doors, and no one enters without out knocking. During his recent visits, I noticed he always tried to engage in more intimate conversations with me, but I, being married, always cut him off. However, when I discovered another explicit message on my husband's phone, I decided to get even during the patient's penultimate visit. As soon as he sat down in the chair, I leaned forward and bumped into his arm. Of course, every dentist ends up bumping into someone eventually, given the positions we need to take. But in this case, I think I just wanted to provoke and satisfy my wounded ego. During one of these encounters, I heard him make a sound of satisfaction, even though his mouth was open. When I finished the procedure, he stood up and instead of heading to the waiting room, came closer to me. My heart raced, beating 1,000 times per minute, even though I was trying to appear as confident as possible. I couldn't stop sweating, and my mind was boiling with anger at myself, because deep down, I knew my boldness had led to this situation. I no longer felt safe. On the contrary, I was being pressed against the wall. He moved closer, and I found myself doing the same. He grabbed my chin, and our lips met. At first, I didn't react at all. I didn't know what to do at that moment. His tongue began to explore, but I remained still. I don't know how long we kissed, but it wasn't long before I suddenly felt a wave of remorse. I pulled away and asked him to leave. I spent the rest of the afternoon plagued by thoughts, conflicted about what was right and what was wrong. The next day, I picked up the phone and called this patient. I told him that while I appreciated his friendliness and found him attractive, what had happened was wrong. We were both married. Though disappointed, he understood. We scheduled a final visit, which would only be for a general cleaning. At home, I looked at my husband and wondered what I had done. Was it right or wrong? Out of guilt, I felt sorry for him. But at the same time, I couldn't help but feel a spark when I remembered what had happened in my office. My imagination ran wild. I confided in a friend, and she advised me to stay calm for 2 reasons. First, because my husband was likely cheating on me, and second, because what had happened in the office was a natural occurrence, and I didn't need to worry if I didn't pursue it further. Her advice was modern for me, even though I'm 29 and still hold onto many taboos. The day my patient returned for his appointment, I was alone as usual. He greeted me with a soft kiss on the cheek, a kind gesture that had become part of our routine. As soon as he settled into the chair, he started talking about our last encounter. But to speed up the process and focus on the cleaning session, I asked him to lie down, hoping to avoid further conversation. While he was getting into position, I accidentally touched his arm again. He looked me in the eyes and winked, a gesture that was both charming and slightly unsettling. I tried to concentrate on the cleaning, but I couldn't ignore his gaze. At one point, he rested his hand on my leg. I pretended not to notice, but I confess that the situation was making me anxious. I felt a mix of emotions I couldn't quite define, whether it was just embarrassment or something else. When the service was over, he stood up and unexpectedly approached me from behind, commenting that I had made a different impression on him. He complimented my appearance and expressed his interest in me directly. With a gentle gesture, he leaned in, bringing us closer, and asked if I felt anything for him too. I remained silent, surprised and unsure how to respond. Then he kissed me again, a warm, wet kiss that was irresistible. Unlike the first time when I pulled away, this time I accepted. Perhaps I was reflecting on my friend's advice, recognizing that my perspective had changed over time. That kiss had a strong impact, leaving me with confusing and intense feelings. He kept his body so close to mine that I could clearly feel his arousal. At that point, I could barely breathe. His whispers grew louder as he pressed his body against mine. Without breaking the kiss, he whispered in my ear, saying that someone had awakened, and I replied that I knew I had been awakened. He said I wanted it, but I resisted, reminding him that we were both married. He persisted, saying that we both desired it, but I held my ground. Then he asked for a memento of me, leaving me confused. He quickly took my hand and placed it on his arousal. Feeling that through the fabric made me nervous, but the heat between us grew, and so did my desire. I didn't object. In fact, I even wanted it. As he started to unbutton his pants, I won't deny it, I felt a strange thrill after 16 years of marriage. Looking into his eyes, I let the moment take over. We didn't stop. I was afraid of enjoying it too much, of giving in to something I couldn't control, afraid that someone might walk in and catch us. I feared not being able to hide anything from my husband, wondering how I would deal with the situation afterward. The fear of crossing my limits was almost paralyzing. I glanced at the clock on the wall. It was 4:50 p.m. The next patient could arrive at any moment or might already be waiting. The idea that someone could interrupt made everything more intense. I was consumed by a tingling sensation that grew stronger throughout my body, especially in my lower regions. My heart raced, driven by a mix of desire and anxiety, nervousness mingling with adrenaline. In a whirlwind of emotions I struggled to understand and control. When it was over, I handed him some napkins to clean himself and did the same. The feeling of his fluid on my skin was a relief, but I couldn't stop the flood of thoughts that invaded my mind. With each movement, a new thought emerged. The intense pleasure I had experienced now seemed like a distant memory, replaced by a growing sense of discomfort. Before reaching my peak, I had convinced myself that what I was doing wasn't so wrong after all, trying to justify the unjustifiable. There had been an uncontrollable desire that in the heat of the moment seemed to allow anything. But now, With my mind clearer, that certainty had dissipated, replaced by a bitter doubt. Lucas leaned in to kiss me, but I only returned a brief peck out of politeness rather than desire. The coldness I felt was new and unsettling. What had once seemed intense now felt wrong and disturbing. I began to wonder if I should have resisted more if what had happened could have been avoided. Doubt and regret took over me. I questioned whether the pleasure of the moment was worth the anguish and confusion I now felt. As he prepared to leave, the moment was charged with tension. He looked at me with anxious eyes and a hesitant voice, asking when we might see each other again. I responded firmly, trying to mask the turmoil inside me, telling him there would be no next time. It had been a one-time experience and would not happen again. He seemed surprised and disappointed, but I tried to remain composed. Fortunately, the last patient of the day didn't show up, allowing me to leave early. The office was quieter than usual, and I felt a momentary relief, knowing I could escape the emotional chaos that had engulfed me. When I got home, I looked at my husband with a mix of love and exhaustion. We women often know when our men make mistakes, but when it comes to confronting them, we find ourselves paralyzed by guilt and ethical dilemmas. I locked the bathroom door and stepped into the shower, letting the hot water wash over me as I cried, releasing the frustration and sadness that had built up. The solitude under the flow of water cleansed not only my body, but also my soul. When I left the bathroom, I felt slightly lighter. I went to bed and kissed my husband before falling asleep, trying to convey the affection I hadn't shown in a long time. This simple gesture, though small, carried a sincere attempt to reconnect, even though our situation was far from resolved. That was my first experience with infidelity. It may seem trivial, but for me, it was an extraordinary and transformative event that pushed me far beyond my usual boundaries. The guilt and confusion that followed were overwhelming, but they also forced me to confront aspects of my life and marriage that I had been avoiding for a long time. In the days that followed, I found myself constantly replaying the events in my mind, trying to make sense of my actions and the emotions that had driven me. I questioned everything: my marriage, my values, and even my sense of self. How could I have allowed myself to be swept up in such a moment? And what did it mean for my relationship with my husband? I started to analyze our marriage more closely, wondering if there were underlying issues that I hadn't addressed. The routine, the lack of excitement, the emotional distance. These were all things I had noticed before, but had never really confronted. Now they seemed impossible to ignore. At the same time, I couldn't shake the memory of the intensity I had felt during that forbidden encounter. It was as if a part of me had been awakened, a part that had been dormant for years. But instead of feeling liberated, I felt trapped by the consequences of my actions. I decided to take some time to reflect and figure out what I really wanted. I knew I needed to talk to my husband, but I wasn't sure how to approach the conversation. I didn't want to hurt him, but I also couldn't continue living with this secret hanging over me. After a few days, I finally gathered the courage to talk to him. I didn't confess everything, but I told him that I had been feeling distant and that we needed to work on our relationship. To my surprise, he was receptive and admitted that he had noticed the same things. We both agreed that we needed to make more of an effort to reconnect and rekindle the passion that had once defined our relationship. It wasn't an easy process. We had many difficult conversations, and there were moments when I doubted whether we could ever get back to where we had been. But slowly, we began to rebuild our connection, finding new ways to communicate and be present with each other. Through it all, I kept the secret of my infidelity to myself. I knew that revealing it would only cause more pain and potentially destroy the progress we were making. Instead, I used the experience as a reminder of the importance of honesty and fidelity in a relationship. I vowed never to let myself be tempted like that again. In the end, my experience with infidelity was a wake-up call. It forced me to confront the cracks in my marriage and pushed me to take action before it was too late. While I regret the choices I made, I also recognize that they led me to a deeper understanding of myself and my relationship. As time passed, the guilt and confusion gradually faded, replaced by a renewed commitment to my marriage. My husband and I continued to work on our relationship, and though we still faced challenges, we were stronger for having gone through them together. Looking back, I realize that infidelity, while devastating, doesn't have to define a person or a relationship. It's what you do afterward, how you learn, grow, and change that truly matters. For me, it was a lesson in self-awareness and a reminder of the importance of love, trust, and communication in any partnership.